TikTok, time to rock. How is everyone doing this evening or morning or afternoon, wherever you are in the world? I'm in, what state am I in? Georgia?
Georgia.
Right. I'm in Georgia with my friend Tim Stratton and my friend Dr. Mike Licona. Look at this. This guy's, hang on. Look at the complainers here. Cliff Wilson, you're late. We're 1 minute late.
Come on.
We're actually 1 minute late. So I'm trying to show these guys how to use the programs. I'm here with Mike and Tim, who need to up their game on YouTube, right? They've got great content, but there's content and then there's getting your content out to the world. Tim, before we get started, introduce you, just explain how my recent words in Israel changed your life forever.
Yeah, well, my name's Tim Stratton. I have a website called FreeThinkingMinistries.com. I love to blog and podcast, things like that. But the three of us were in Israel together not long ago, along with many others. And, you know, Dave started picking on me. He's like, hey, Stratton, 2008 called. They want their blogs back. When are you going to become a YouTube rock star like me? And, you know, I was convicted. I felt the Holy Spirit, along with Dave Wood, convict me that, hey, you know, I need to up my game and join the YouTube world. So I came all the way here to meet with Dave so he could give me some pointers. So here you go.
So yeah, back in 2008, I was blogging too. And just to be clear, no, it's good to, there are people who go to blogs. I'll go to blogs to look things up and stuff like that. And I really need to start posting on my blog again, but it's good to diversify.
That's right.
It's good to diversify. So you post stuff on YouTube and on your blog, and then you're rocking that stuff. So this is, again, Tim Stratton, FreeThinking Ministries, linked to his channel, which, how have you been using your channel up until now if you haven't really been on YouTube? Is it like a place to store videos or something?
That's exactly right, just so I could put videos on my website. I had a YouTube channel here that really nobody knew about. So stay tuned. It's going to be officially kind of relaunched soon. But hey, I'd love to have you subscribe to what I've got going right now. Just search for FreeThinking Ministries.
No, the links in the description box.
There you
don't
go.
need to search for anything.
All right, good.
All right, so go ahead and if you want, then you can. Well, basically, no, wait. See if you like some of his responses that he gives tonight during a Q&A, and then if you think, hey, I like this guy, then click on there. Understanding that up until now he's kind of just been using YouTube to store his videos, but that he's going to be focusing more on YouTube here in the near future. So then you can be ready for it. All right, and we have as well Mike Licona. How you doing, Mike?
Hey, doing just great. It's great to have you. Thanks for coming on down to Georgia and visiting with us and showing us some of the ins and outs of YouTube.
Yeah, we're doing YouTube.
The master with it.
We're doing YouTube tutorials. I told people recently we're going to build an online apologetics empire. We're going to get a bunch of people posting on YouTube and all this stuff, and so that's it's one of the cool things to do this year. Gonna run everything. Gonna run everyone through YouTube training and get everyone. Even see, there are people. You know, there are apologists who write lots of stuff. There are apologists who go around speaking. There are YouTube apologists and people like me who focus all their attention on YouTube. But basically, wherever your energy is focused, if you're using YouTube at all, you might as well use it well. So that's what we want for everyone this year. Look at this. Hang on. I'm just focusing on some of these complaints. First of all, we have, where is Sam? Who cares where Sam is? He's probably sitting in front of his screen crying that he's not with me because he's jealous. And he's always been jealous of Mike Licona. And he's always looked up to Mike Licona as the greatest New Testament scholar and historical Jesus scholar on the planet. And so Sam is probably in tears right now, trying to figure out why he's not on here. And Sam, it's easy. It's because you suck at YouTube. All right. Now you heard it. One sec. We want to hear more from you real quick. We're just trying to get through a few of these initial comments. Fred Sanford says, can you repeat the live chat rules, please? Thank you. If you're talking about whether people should be banned or something like that, basically, if people are in the comment section and they're really nasty and not focusing on the comment, not focusing on anything and trying to distract people and so on, you want to give them a timeout at first and warn them. If people are like insulting others, not really contributing anything, you want to give more leeway to like Muslims than you do, to Christians, right? If a Christian's in here and he's just being a jerk, well, he should know better. If it's a Muslim or an atheist, you might want to give them a little more leeway, give them a warning or something like that. But guys, come on, we should be here to kind of, get along and have fun and not be so darn negative all the time. With that said, we understand that people are going to disagree with us, so they're free to disagree with us. They're free to argue. They're free to disagree with us and respond and things like that. So you're basically looking for people who are nasty or cursing or something like that. And then, yeah, all right. Wait, Richard said, David, in Georgia, you should almost feel like you went home. I grew up in Tennessee and I felt at home there. My dad was from Georgia. His whole family was from Georgia. So yeah, I spent a lot of time down here. All right, so Mike Licona. Guys, if you don't know Mike Licona, Mike and I actually go way, 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 way back. So I knew Mike before I knew my wife, and then I knew Nabil before I knew my wife, but I knew Mike before I knew Nabil. So I got out of prison in the year 2000, and I met Mike sometime shortly after that, and then I met Nabil after that. And if you read Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, you've actually read some about Mike, or if you've listened to Nabil's testimony, because since I knew Mike, then there was a time when I asked Nabil. We were at school, we were in the room where we had our speech and debate meetings, and I was talking to Nabil, and I asked him, I said, what would actually bother you if you found it out, right? What would bother you about Islam? What would make you start to doubt Islam if you found out that it was true? I was thinking in terms of evidence, right? Like, oh, if I found out Muhammad did such and such, then I would start to doubt Islam. But he gave a completely different kind of answer. He said, if I saw my dad kind of backed into a corner and he couldn't respond and someone refuted my dad, then I would start being concerned about Islam, because he said he had a lot of confidence in his dad teaching him over the years. And so anyway, I thought that was interesting. The reason I thought that was interesting is it wouldn't matter to me at all if anyone in my family was backed into a corner on something like that. It's not where my confidence in what I believe did not rest on my family and so on. So when he said that, basically I knew that Mike Licona works with Gary Habermas, and so they both spend a lot. Right now, Mike's one of the top guys in the world on the resurrection. Back then, he was a little more up and coming, but he had studied under Gary Habermas, the master, and Gary Habermas was coming down. And so I went to Nabil one day and I said, hey, Nabil, it'd be cool. Why don't you and your dad come over and I know this guy and he studies the resurrection, and he works with Gary who studies the resurrection. Maybe we'll get together and study, have a discussion about the reresurrection. You bring your dad and so on. And so the idea was that Nabil had already told me that if he saw his dad backed into a corner, that would bother him. So brought Nabil and his dad came over to Mike Licona's house. And so anyway, if you are familiar with that story, then that's this guy. So Mike, what got you interested in apologetics? We're going to be taking questions and responding to stuff and so on. Right now, we just want to make sure, because before we actually went live, I saw people asking who these guys were. And I know some of you know Mike, and I'm sure some of you know Tim as well. But for those who don't, we want to have some introduction. So Mike, why don't you tell us how you got interested in apologetics and so on?
Yeah, it was the fall of 1985. I was finishing my final semester of coursework for my master's degree in New Testament studies. And I just started to ask myself the question, how do I know this stuff is true? I'd been born into a Christian family, and Christianity is really the only worldview I knew. I mean, I heard of other religions, worldviews, atheism, Islam, Buddhism, etc. But I really didn't know much at all about them. I figured if I'd been born in India, I'd be a Hindu. If I'd been born in Afghanistan, I'd be a Muslim. I believed I had a relationship with Christ, with God. I was spending probably 2 hours a day in prayer at that point, and several hours a day reading scriptures. I was learning to read it in its original language, the New Testament, that is, in Greek. And so I just asked myself, am I just brainwashing myself? Do I really know that this stuff is true? And so I started to doubt my faith for the first time. I got one of my roommates suggested I go see Gary Habermas. So I knocked on the door of his office. He invited me in. I mean, he didn't put me down at all or anything like that. He just said, hey, there are lots of people who doubt. He told me he had doubted at one point. But then he started to go through the evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And he said, if Jesus rose, Christianity's true. That kind of settled my doubts for that moment. I was just looking for an answer, someone to reassure me that Christianity was true, and Gary did. Mm-hmm. But later on, I started to doubt again. And I went through various periods of doubt. And even into my doctoral work on the resurrection of Jesus, as I was studying the philosophy of history, I've done a lot of work on the philosophy of history and research with it. And I started to recognize that I had my own biases. I wanted Christianity to be true. I wanted the resurrection of Jesus to be confirmed. And this had a very, this wasn't good in an investigation on the resurrection of Jesus because it could compromise the integrity of my research. And so I worked out things I was just obsessed with doing as an objective research project on the resurrection of Jesus as was possible for me. Nobody can be 100% objective. We all have what we want. But really what we want is truth. And if Christianity is false, I wanted to know that. I didn't want it to be false, but if it is false, I wanted to know that. And so it took me a lot longer to get my doctorate because the average doctoral dissertation is 60 to 80,000 words. Mine was over 250,000. So whereas in graduate school, a term paper that was 20 pages, double spaced with a few footnotes was a nightmare to me. Mine was, well over 500 pages, single spaced, and over 2,000 footnotes. So that's what led me into apologetics. It was my own doubts. I needed them resolved, and I didn't. In the end, it wasn't pat answers that I wanted. I didn't want to just be reassured that what I believed was true. I wanted to get to the bottom of things. I wanted to know whether it really was true, no matter where it led.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, that's cool. I'm going to ask Tim the same question because keep in mind, lots of people become Christians. The vast majority of people become Christians who are raised Christians, don't decide to go into kind of what we do, constant, endless discussions of the evidence and so on. So it's good to find out why. We're going to take a couple quick comments real quick first, and then we're going to go back to Tim. Chris Claus here says, Chris, are you related to Santa? I'm sorry, I'm sure you get that all the time. Chris said in the super chat, God bless you. Question for Mike Licona, do you still feel looking at the Gospels as historical biographies is the best way to view them?
I do. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of work that has been done over the years. Both classicists and New Testament scholars view the Gospels as ancient biographies, or at minimum that they share a lot in common with ancient biography. Back then, genres were fluid. They could blend in with one another and cross lines. So yeah, I think we have good reasons to believe that the Gospels are ancient biographies and that they intended to report accurate history. Mm-hmm.
And guys, just so you know, again, Mike probably talk a little bit more about his background, but he's a historical Jesus scholar. So he studies this way more than I do. So this would be a good time for questions along those lines. Mike, up here we have interesting comment here. Jude Augustine said, hey, David, I like you, but I disagree with you with your video about India's I am Indian and a Catholic. It's pretty safe. Come here and see. Stop judging from there. Jude, here's my concern. One, I would have to wonder if you watched my video, because I acknowledge that Christians and Hindus get along very well in certain areas, and that in certain areas there don't seem to be any problems. I pointed out that in other areas of Hindus, churches are being burned down, Christians are being killed, and so on. Now, so if you're disagreeing with that and you're saying that this doesn't happen that there aren't places where churches are being destroyed and vandalized, and there aren't places where Christians are being killed. If you're saying that, then that's pretty interesting, but you'd have to take that up with the New York Times, the BBC, NDTV, all these different networks, and some of them Indian, some of them Western, that are actually putting up pictures of burning churches and cars that have been torched and so on. And you're going to have to show that these guys are just flat out making all of this stuff up. And if you're going to do that, then I'd be interested in hearing that, because you'd be exposing some gross blunders from the media. But Mike, you happen to know some people who know quite a bit about.
I have a board
the
member.
situation.
I have a board member. He's a physician here in the United States.
One of your friends, you know someone personally.
He's a close friend. He's from India, born in India, raised in India. He practices medicine over here now, but he became a Christian. He was a Brahmin. He's Brahmin, and became a Christian. He says he cannot return to India now. And his mom became a Christian and is experiencing some persecution right now over in India. So, yeah, Christians are being persecuted. Now, I don't know the full story, but I've been told that the current president of India has said he wants to wipe out Christianity from India in the near future.
Yeah. Well, so, Jude, again, in order to, we kind of know too many people who are saying, no, there is persecution over here. So again, the only way I can see of reconciling the information that we're aware of is that it's okay in certain areas and not okay in other areas. So if you're saying, no, that's wrong, it's okay in all areas, please explain. Question from Candace. Candace said, are there any specialties or niches where you see a need for a Christian apologist to step in via YouTube and social media? Both these guys could comment if there's any areas they'd like to see people go into. I'll say what I would like to see. What I'd like to see is people focusing on sort of particular individuals, right? In other words, if there's an atheist that you watch and you think there need to be more responses to him, focus on that guy. And whenever that guy posts something, like put it this way, there are tons of Muslims who dedicate their entire channels to responding to me, right? Like everything I say, they'll post stuff. They usually don't even understand what I'm saying, and they usually misrepresent it. That's fine, but it is interesting that they understand. Hey, here's a guy. Let's keep focusing responses on him. That could be the case with sort of every important Muslim apologist on YouTube, or every important atheist apologist on YouTube. If there were people on YouTube who are responding to everything these guys kind of put out, then you've kind of got all the bases covered. In other words, I cannot respond to everyone. There's too much stuff being put out. But if there were 50 Christians and they were focusing on 50 different people, then you've got everything covered, right? You've got responses to everyone. What do you guys think on that? Any particular topics or stuff you?
Well, I agree with Dave. I have to say that probably Sam Harris was a guy that I was focusing on that kind of launched FreeThinking Ministries. He came out with a book called Free Will, in which he concludes that we don't have free will. And that really got me thinking. And it just, I wanted to go on a mission to see if that was true. And so that's why I started FreeThinking Ministries. I do believe that we have free will. I also think that we can deductively prove that. And I think the best explanation for the fact that humans have free will is the existence of God. In fact, I think it's the biblical view of God. I argue for that. But there's also other atheists that I like to interact with. Mike does the same thing. He's got a handful of guys that he's really kind of focused on interacting with. And Mike, why don't you share a little bit about that too?
Oh, yeah, well, I do agree with both of you. And it's hard to know who to go, after. I guess you just have to take on who you want to. But several years ago, I know Bart Ehrman was having a big impact. He still is. Probably the most influential skeptical New Testament scholar in the world today. And, he's a really good communicator. He's very persuasive. I wasn't persuaded by his arguments. And so I years ago, I did a few reviews of his book, some of his books, and also ended up debating him a few times. We have since become friends. Mm-hmm. I respect Bart. We get along really well. We disagree on things, but we have a friendship. So then that's been kind of interesting how that has happened. But I value that friendship. So, you know, and it's neat. We can disagree with people. We can challenge what they're saying. He can challenge what I'm saying. I think as long as we do it respectfully, we can get along pretty well. But it takes two to do that. Bart's willing to do that. I'm willing to do that. And perhaps you guys can find someone who's willing to do that, and you're willing to do that.
Yeah, so guys, I would say 2 ways to go. Either focus on what you're really interested in, or focus on something where you notice that there aren't enough people responding to it. One of the main reasons I am still dealing with Islam is I've never thought there were enough people dealing with the topic, right? I mean, when I was getting started in apologetics, almost everything was geared towards atheism. When I'm sitting there thinking, gosh, you've got this ideology with well over 1 billion followers, and there just were very few people focusing on that. And so find something you're interested in or passionate about, or find something where you're looking at it, and even if you're not necessarily focused on that, you understand there just aren't a lot of people responding to it. A couple of super chats here. Hannah says, thank you for what you do. Third time watching the live stream, and it's helping me. That's cool. We'll keep watching. We're gonna have by the way, today we're just kind of doing a Q&A, but if you want us to address a specific topic over the next couple of days that has something to do, especially with the areas that these guys deal with. So Mike deals with a lot of, again, historical Jesus studies, things like that. Tim, what are your favorite topics again that you deal with?
Primarily free will and the implications of that topic. I also, when it comes to Christian theism, I argue for a view called Molinism. Namely, mere Molinism is a focus. That's what I did my PhD dissertation work on. And so I like to argue or tell people about the apologetic significance of Molinism. And if you're a Christian and a Christian apologist, why you should also be a Molinist when you do apologetics works. But this is one of the things that I find interesting. I don't expect all Christians to find it interesting or to agree with me, but I find it a fascinating topic.
We might want to do just a whole live stream on like free will issues.
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
We might do that before I leave here. Gene Wallace in the super chat says, Jesus saves, the rest enslave. Amen. Harley says, Plantinga argues that the proof for the resurrection can bolster faith, but never ground it. Knowledge of God is given by divine action. Thoughts? So what do you think about that?
Well, you know, I know Plantinga is a great philosopher, and you know he's going to be able to talk about some things that's just going to lose me. Okay,
one of the just to be clear, one of the greatest philosophers of all time, and certainly one of the greatest philosophers of our generation.
So I would just say, look, I think most of us recognize, I think most people recognize that if Jesus rose from the dead, Christianity is true, period, right? I remember after my debate with Shabir Ali back at Regent University in 2004.
I was there with Nabil.
You were.
Sitting side by side with Nabil.
And
when he was still a Muslim.
And you took Shabir to see the Passion of the Christ.
I took Shabir to see the Passion of the Christ. I
Oh.
messaged him ahead of time, and I was like, hey, you guys are doing a debate on the resurrection. The movie might come up because the movie just came out. So if you want to see it, I'd be happy to take you there. And so I actually picked him up when he was coming out of the mosque to give a presentation. That's where I met Shabir. And I took him out to get some food, and then took him to see the Passion of the Christ.
So I remember after the debate, you were walking out with Gary Habermas. And I think Gary had a graduate assistant with him that he brought. And you were walking ahead of Nabil and I. We came out of the auditorium. We're walking down into the parking lot. And I remember Nabil saying, you know, Mike, you did really well tonight. I think you won the debate. And he said, I think Christianity does have some good evidence. So does Islam. But he said, the only thing I think you Christians have over Islam is the resurrection of Jesus. And I said,
that's it, folks.
Nabil, did you hear what you just said? Because if Jesus rose from the dead, it's game, set, match. Christianity's true, period. And he said, well, yeah, you're probably right there. And then I said, hey, Doc, Gary, come here. Nabil, tell Gary what you just told me. You remember that? And then he came down and we all talked about it for a little. So if we're going to talk about grounding and whatever, I'm not sure in what sense that Plantinga is referring it to. I would just say, if Jesus rose from the dead, we are on good grounds for believing that Christianity is true. And there's really good evidence to think that Jesus rose from the dead. Now, if we go through some philosophical and scientific arguments for God's existence, does that bolster the case? Sure. But I do think that just looking at the resurrection itself, the evidence for it, the historical case, gives us adequate reason, more than adequate, to believe that Christianity is true.
Yeah. Now, if just to be clear, Harley, if you're talking about like, saving knowledge of the truth or something like that, obviously we believe that the Holy Spirit, right? That the Holy Spirit is the one who does that, and that we can't come to Jesus unless we're drawn by the Father. And so, if you're talking about that, but I mean, guess what? People can look at the evidence for the resurrection, conclude that Jesus rose from the dead, and then conclude, well, gosh, if I'm going to listen to anyone tell me about God, I'm probably going to listen to that guy. Do you have anything you want to add, or should we go to some more?
Yeah, let's just keep it going.
Keep going? All right. All right, so Jared, question for Mike. What is the best evidence for the resurrection today? You're going to have to encapsulate this. We'll probably do something again here in the next couple of days in case. So if I'm going to spend a day, one live stream with Tim discussing free will issues, then maybe one day you can basically take everyone through the modern research on the resurrection. So, but if you were given it in a nutshell, what would you say?
I'd say best evidence, or best or simplest way to present it is, there are a number of facts, and I say facts in the sense that these are strongly supported items that are strongly supported by the data, and so strongly supported that even nearly a universal majority of scholars today will grant them as facts, whether they're atheist, agnostic, Jewish scholars, whatever. They all will, acknowledge these. These would be things like Jesus' death by crucifixion, that shortly after a number of his followers had experiences that persuaded them Jesus had been raised from the dead and had appeared to them. And you've got Paul, who had been a persecutor of the church, and then he becomes a Christian when he has an experience he believes was the risen Jesus who had appeared to him. So, I mean, if you just take those three facts, which are granted by nearly 100% of scholars across the board today. Now, of course, you're always going to get someone who disagrees, like say Jesus never existed. You even have Holocaust deniers. You have people who say we never landed on the moon. So you're never going to get 100%. But I'm talking about bona fide scholars in the relevant field, nearly 100% would agree on all three of those facts. Now, what a historian has to do is formulate hypotheses to account for those facts, and then choose the hypothesis that best explains those. Which one explains all of them? Which one explains them without forcing them to fit? Which one explains them without some sort of great amount of speculation involved? Given our background knowledge, which one of them explains these facts the best? And the resurrection hypothesis by far explains those three facts better than any competing hypothesis. So that's how I, in a nutshell, I think is the best. It may not be the strongest way. You could add some other things, but I think it's something that where we can all come together and say, okay, we can agree on these facts. Now, what's the best explanation of these facts? And then we can, discuss that. But that's how that's a simple way to argue for the resurrection.
Dapper Dave in the super chat says, strange request. Can you dedicate a video that addresses the appeal of Islam from the Quran? The appeal of Islam from the Quran. I would like to be better having a conversation with a person of that faith to explain that Christianity is the way to go. Thanks. As far as most people who convert to Islam, it has nothing to do with the Quran. They hear stuff about Islam and about what it teaches, usually completely misrepresented. Muslim preachers will adapt the message to whatever people happen to like or believe in an area. So if you're all about feminism, they will adapt the message of Islam so that it's a complete feminist message. Whatever you believe in, they will adapt it for you to get you to convert. As far as the Quran, there are occasionally people who are impressed by the Quran and convert on that basis. It's usually just this constant emphasis on God and worshiping God, and as well as incorporating a lot of the biblical figures, right? A lot of the prophets that they're familiar with and so on, as well as Jesus. And so they're reading about, so it's usually people who have some sort of problem already with Christianity, but who are raised as Christians. And so they're looking for an alternative. And then Islam comes along and says, hey, we're the alternative here. Look at the Quran. You already believe in all these guys, but Islam is better. and so people convert on those grounds. But that's kind of the only it's kind of the only thing that I would find that someone might that I'm aware of, that someone would, study the Quran and come to believe in Islam. Again, there are people who will say, oh, it's because of the miraculous eloquence of the Quran, or it's because of the amazing scientific insights of the Quran. Those people usually aren't basing it on the actual Quran. They're basing it on what people say about the Quran. So it's kind of a different category. All right, so Dapper Dave, all right, we're going to flip over to Tim right now. I said we were going to have Tim explain why he decided to get involved in apologetics when just lots of people who don't go that route.
Yeah. Well, I was raised in a Christian family, raised going to church. I took it for granted. I basically thought everybody was raised that way. And eventually I became a youth pastor. I thought that was, just the right thing to do. But after being in youth ministry for a while, a couple of years into it, I remember a young man tapping me on the shoulder. He'd been in my Bible study for a couple of years. He was the son of one of the elders in my church. And he tapped me on the shoulder right before youth group started. It's the beginning of his junior year. Had him since he was a freshman. And he said, Tim, I just wanted to come and let you know face to face I'm not coming back to youth group this year. And I said, oh, that's too bad. Are you going to a different church now? And he goes, no. And I said, well, are you going to keep coming to Bible study? He goes, no, I'm not coming back to church. I'm not coming to Bible study. I became an atheist over the summer. I've been watching YouTube videos with Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and Stephen Hawking and fill in the blank with your favorite atheist. And he said, they've convinced me that book that you've had us studying is nothing but a bunch of fairy tales. I believe them, and God does not exist. And I said, dude, you know that's not true. You've seen it. You've read it in the Bible. Paul tells Timothy that every word is God-breathed. It's the inspired word of God. And he said, yeah, but I don't believe that that's true. And I said, yeah, but it's in the word of God. And he said, but why should I think it's in the word of God? And I said, because it says it's the word of God. Paul tells Timothy that. And he goes, Tim, that's begging the question. That's a logical fallacy. This is a 16-year-old, and I didn't even know what a logical fallacy was at that time. And he said, tell you what, Tim, if you can answer one of my questions or objections, I'll stick around. And I don't know for sure, it's probably gave me a dozen from which to choose. And guess how many I could answer? 0. And he looked at me with a look I'll never forget, with disappointment. And I felt like I just really let him down. He even had a little bit of tears in his eyes. And he just looked at me. He was just disgusted with me. And almost as if he was saying, you call yourself a youth pastor. And he turned around and walked out of the doors of the church. I'll never forget it. And some of those objections, man, they were pretty good. At least I thought they were at the time. Kind of shook me a little bit, kind of rocked my faith. I didn't know what to do. I went home that night, and with that shaken faith, I prayed. And I said, God, what do I do here? I never felt like I was the smart kid in school. And he's raising all these questions, and objections for everyone from physicists to philosophers. And I was like, I can't contend with those. And I felt like God was telling me, man, if you're going to be a shepherd, you got to learn how to defend the sheep. And I didn't know how to do that. So a colleague of mine gave me a book called Reasonable Faith by William Lane Craig. And I started Googling him, and I found, I was watching his debates. I found some guy named Mike Licona, reading his stuff. And man, my faith was just being strengthened, and I was learning how to answer these questions. Eventually, I wanted to go to Biola University so I could learn from these guys. And it's just been a fantastic ride. My mind has been transformed. So that's how I got into apologetics. I realized that there were so many high school students and college students that I was working with who were losing their faith. And even if they were keeping their faith was getting rocked too. And I realized they had real questions, genuine questions that needed answered. And I felt like God was calling me to answer these questions. And it's been a fun journey. But that's how I got into the field of apologetics and philosophy, and now systematic theology too. So,
well, speaking of philosophy, Braxton Hunter here.
Braxton.
Is Cartesian certainty attainable or necessary in historical studies or philosophy or anything else? I'll just say quickly here at the beginning, yeah, I think you can have Cartesian certainty in certain areas that Descartes said that you can have them in, like my own existence, right? There are philosophers who will deny this, right? I think it was Hume who said, no, you can't conclude that you exist from thinking. You just conclude that thinking exists, right? So you do have people who would object to it. I think it's silly. If I'm thinking, I obviously exist, and I think I'm absolutely certain about that. There is the question, though, of whether you'd have that kind of certainty in different fields like history and so on. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. It seems obvious that I can know with certainty that I exist. I'm not sure about my body or this guy.
Yeah.
I can run thought experiments. Maybe I'm in some kind of a matrix or a brain in a vat or something like that. But it's obvious that the thing that I call I exists. I'm a thinking thing. And even if I don't have a body, even if I don't have a brain, I'm a thinking thing. And so that seems certain. But yeah, I think there's very few things that we can have that kind of certainty with. But I think we can know many things with extremely high degrees of certainty. And as Mike likes to point out, we can know that the resurrection of Jesus occurred with extremely high degrees of historical certainty. And so, I would agree. There's very few things we can know with 100% certainty, but I do know I exist. And that doesn't mean that I don't possess knowledge of these other things. I have real knowledge that God exists. In fact, I'd say I'm certain that God exists. But I don't like putting numbers. I don't think we have to put numbers on things like that. I just say I possess knowledge that Christianity is true.
Mike, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, there is one thing I can know for certain, is that Braxton Hunter is an awesome guy. I love Braxton. He's a great friend, one of my dearest friends, really a great guy, cool guy. I'd encourage all the viewers here to plug into his station at Trinity Radio. He's just a great guy.
Let me add that Braxton is also now a new regular contributor on FreeThinkingMinistries.com, so you can follow his work there.
Wow. Yeah, he's a great guy. That said, I would also add that when it comes to historical work, there's no way that you're going to get absolute certainty, Cartesian certainty, when it comes to historical conclusions, especially when you go into the past. All historians can do is look at the data that has come down to us, formulate hypotheses, and make conclusions that are based on varying degrees of certainty, and every one of our conclusions are provisional. In other words, we'd say it could have been otherwise. Now, that is in terms of historical conclusions. They can have a great deal of certainty, but we're not going to have absolute certainty. But very few things in life we have absolute certainty about. And as I heard one person said, if we wait until all the lights are green before we head into town, we're going to spend the rest of our lives at home.
Yeah, I would add that we normally don't demand absolute certainty for pretty much anything, right? I mean, are you absolutely certain that someone's not going to axe murder you as soon as you walk out your house? No, someone might do that stuff, but you don't live your life based on things you're absolutely certain about. One thing is interesting, though. I think there are lots of atheists who sort of make their career out of demanding absolute certainty in certain areas, right? In other words, if you give them if they use an argument like the problem of evil, and they say, hey, my argument proves this, then, even if you can point out 12 different problems with the argument, you're still supposed to accept the argument because, gosh, there's just so much suffering in the world, right? But if you're giving a design argument or a cosmological argument or something like that, if they can find any way out, no matter how ridiculously improbable, even if the only odds of them being right is 1 in 10 to the 257th power, something like that, they'll say, there you see, your argument fails. And so the demand is actually for absolute certainty, which we have almost nowhere. So basically, people shift their levels of skepticism in response to what they do or do not want to believe. If someone says something that you don't want to believe, if you don't want to believe in God, well, it's very easy. You just raise your skepticism level to infinite and then say, now prove to me that God exists, when no evidence is going to do it. If you want to believe in objective moral values, even though they don't fit on your worldview. Well, you lower your skepticism level down to 1, and now, hey, your feelings count as complete proof of objective morality and so on. When you would never accept someone's feelings as proof of the existence of God or something like that. So, yeah, we don't have the only way I think you could get Cartesian certainty about something historical would be to use Descartes' method to do that. So he starts off just with knowing that he exists, and then knowing that he has certain ideas, and then using those ideas to make an argument for the existence of God, and then arguing based on the nature of God that I can know other things because God gives me reliable faculties and so on, and therefore I can trust my senses. And if you might be able to go that route, but I think with Descartes' view is that since God gave me my cognitive faculties, then as long as I am using them appropriately in the way God intended, I'm not gonna be led into error and so on. But I think even if you took that method and you were talking about history, you could always be concerned that you're not using your faculties properly, and so I don't think you'd have that level of certainty.
I like how you said, as long as I'm using them appropriately.
Yeah,
that's well said.
Yeah. Here's one for Mike here. Maria says, could you consider the spiritual resurrection of Jesus, not the physical? So I think the question is here, something you get, and you've debated people who have this position. Can we think of Jesus just rising spiritually rather than a physical resurrection, where it's actually his body that returns to life? Does everyone get the question? So Christians normally believe in a physical resurrection. Jesus was buried in a tomb and then actually rose physically. There are people who would want to argue that no, it's just a spiritual resurrection, right?
Yeah.
Not a physical one. What are your thoughts on that, Mike?
Well, I think they're wrong. Not only do all four Gospels clearly present a bodily raised Jesus that leaves behind an empty tomb. They end up talking with him. They are invited to touch his hands and his side where, the nails in the spear had been. Now, someone can say, well, Paul wrote probably before all of the Gospels, and he talks about a spiritual resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15. But you got to read all of Paul. I don't think that's what's going on in Paul. Romans 8:11 says, the Spirit who raised Jesus from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies, which suggests it was to Jesus' mortal body that was given life. Philippians 3:20-21 says, we eagerly wait a Savior who will transform our humble bodies, transform them to be conformed to Jesus's glorious body. So it's a transformation. You read 1 Corinthians 15, it talks about, and verses 50 and following, it talks about a transformation of our bodies. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 13 through 17, probably the earliest piece of literature in our New Testament. And Paul says he doesn't want us to grieve as those who have no hope when we've lost a loved one, because we're going to see them again. And he basically says how when Christ returns, he's going to bring back with him those who have died as believers. And then the trumpet will sound, and the dead in Christ will be raised. Well, what does that mean? If he's bringing the dead in Christ back with him, how are they going to be raised then after he brings them back with him? Well, it's simple. The dead in Christ are raised in terms of their corpse are brought back to life. The spirit of that person is brought back into that corpse, and then it's transformed into the powerful, glorious body that's animated by the Holy Spirit, as described in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. You have Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 that says, we die and we're with Christ. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. So again, when we die, our spirit leaves our body, goes to be with Christ in heaven. When he returns, he brings back our spirit with him. Our corpses are regenerated back to life. The spirit is returned to the body, and it is raised, transformed into a resurrection body. And several verses, like I said, in Romans chapter 8, verse 11, 1 Corinthians 15:20, Christ is the first fruits of those who sleep, dead. And then verse 23, each in his own order, Christ the first fruits. After that, those who return, those who belong to Christ at his coming. So again, we go to be with Christ in spirit when we die, but the resurrection happens of us. Bodily resurrection happens when he returns, but it's the same way he was raised in the year 30 or 33. So it is definitely a bodily resurrection that Paul and the Gospels refer to. Spiritual resurrection is just misconstrued.
Here's another quick one from Mike. Mike said he doesn't like reading the Old Testament. Can you clarify? What are you talking about, Mike? You're saying you don't like the Bible? What the heck is wrong with you?
Yeah, I'd be happy to clarify. Look, I like to be honest. There are some things in the Old Testament just they bother me. They kind of disturb me. I don't understand them. But I have to admit, it's a different kind of literature than we have in the New Testament. I do believe that it's divinely inspired. I have enough trouble understanding some of the New Testament literature within its context, and that's why I like to study the ancient world and understand how things were going on. I haven't had the time to do that with the Old Testament. So yeah, there are some things that trouble me in the Old Testament, things that make me feel uncomfortable. And I know that I'm just never going to get the time to be able to wrestle through them as like some of the Old Testament scholars do. I'm really focused on the New Testament.
All right. We have a Ham Sunshine says, please introduce Tim to vocab. You know vocab.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Don't you know vocab?
What's up, vocab?
No. He's not vocab. He's saying introduce Tim to
Oh,
vocab.
yeah, I know vocab.
Yeah, he knows vocab. What are you talking about? What are you talking about, Ham Sunshine? Maybe he wants you to choke vocab out or something like that.
I'm not messing with him.
All right, here's one. I know it's not New Testament, but how do you counter the God of the gaps argument? You familiar with the God of the gaps argument?
Yeah.
Everyone know the God of the gaps argument? It goes like this.
Yep.
So you give some argument based on, let's say, probability or something like that. Right? So if you talk about DNA or the origin of life or something, and you show, hey, it's so improbable that these molecules went into this order on their own to form life. It's so probable that there must be a designer. And the response is, no, there's a gap in our knowledge, right? There's a gap in our knowledge. We don't know how it happened. And you're trying to put God into that gap and say God did it when we just don't know how it happened. There's a gap in our knowledge. And so you shouldn't be putting God in that gap. You should instead just wait until that knowledge is filled in. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's the old, well, I can't figure it out, so God must have done it.
Mm-hmm.
I've never reasoned like that. Well, not at least since I got into apologetics and studied that. I might have, the old Tim, the old youth pastor might have done that, which wouldn't have been good. But, I think about arguments like the Kalam cosmological argument. And if the two premises are true, anything that begins to exist has a cause and the universe began to exist. Now, those two premises seem to be true, right? We don't have any reason to doubt them. And all the evidence, all the data supports those two premises. So we're quite rational in saying that those two premises are true. Well, if they're true, the conclusion logically follows that therefore the universe has a cause. And when you think about the nature of the universe, it's all things time and space and all things nature. Well, if nature, time, and space began to exist, now we can make some rational inferences. We're not jumping to conclusions and saying, therefore God, or therefore God must have done it. Not at all. We're saying if nature, time, and space all began to exist, which is supported by the scientific data and through logic alone, if nature, time, and space began to exist, then the cause of all nature has got to be other than nature. And that just simply means supernatural. The cause of time has to be timeless. And if it's timeless, then it's also beginningless because beginnings require time. If it's spaceless, or if the cause of space had a beginning, or if space had a beginning, then whatever caused space to come into existence has to be spaceless. And if it's spaceless, then by definition, it's immaterial because matter requires space to exist in the first place. We can also conclude some other things. Whatever caused nature, time, and space to begin existing, whatever caused the entire universe to begin existing, must be extremely powerful. I can't think of anything that would require more power. And ultimately, I believe, I don't have time to cash this out here, but I believe that we can, since things don't happen apart from time, then the universe couldn't begin to exist unless it's at least the best explanation that the cause of the universe can make a volitional choice, or shall I say, the cause of the universe has free will to create or not to create, and it's not caused to do something, to do so by something else, because there wouldn't be anything else. Anyway, when you start looking at all these rational inferences that the cause of the universe must possess, you start looking at it, wait, timeless, that means it's eternal, spaceless, therefore spirit, if you will, other than nature, supernatural, extremely powerful. It doesn't prove omnipotence by any means, but it sure seems to point that way. And a mind with free will, that only persons do that. What is the best explanation of that? And that seems to be what we call God. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not jumping to that conclusion. I'm reasoning there. I'm taking steps to reach that conclusion rationally. Those are rational inferences based on a deductive conclusion. Mm-hmm. So it's not God of the gaps at all. And we can do that kind of reasoning with all of, Dr. Craig calls it the cumulative case of arguments. And there's more of it than he normally uses as well. So we have good reason to think God exists and good reason to think that Christianity is true.
Yeah, I would just add, I've been planning for a while to make a video on the God of the gaps argument because it's been so massively misused. First thing, here's an interesting fact. It was Christians who came up with the God of the gaps argument, right? It was Christians who noticed that people were pointing to things where we couldn't figure something out and they were saying God did it. And it was Christians who pointed out, hey, some of you people who are arguing for the existence of God based on things we just don't know enough about. You need to stop that. God is the cause of everything, right? God is the cause of the entire universe. God is the cause of all of science. God is the cause of all of these things. So don't try to force God into these little gaps. God's responsible for it all, right? So that was their point, and then atheists jumped onto it, didn't really understand it, and then they pointed out that because some Christians were doing this, right? Some Christians were just pointing out something that we didn't know, and then claiming that God is the cause of it. So one, Christians were the ones who invented this response. So there were Christians who noticed that Christians were doing this, and they called them out for doing it, right? So that's one thing. Two, as Tim's pointing out, when we build an argument based on the fine-tuning of the cosmos or the origin of the universe or the complexity of life, we're not arguing based on our ignorance. We're arguing based on what we know. We're arguing based on this wealth of information we have and what we know about where these things tend to come from. When you see how sophisticated and complex life is, guess what? If all of our experience tells us where you get things that are that sophisticated and that complex. You get them from an intelligent source. So those are a couple things. I would point out. And the other thing is, remember earlier when I mentioned that atheists tend to dial their skepticism up to 10 when there's an argument for the existence of God on the table and they demand complete proof and so on. And as long as you can't give complete proof, they'll reject your argument. Well, notice if atheists were actually consistent with this God of the gaps argument, you could use this about anything. You could use God of the gaps argument about anything. So suppose I say right here, hey, I know I'm holding a water bottle in my hand. Say, well, no, maybe there's another explanation that you're not thinking about, right? Maybe a powerful alien is tricking you into thinking that you're holding a water bottle. You haven't considered that explanation, so quit using your water bottle of the gaps explanation, right? Like, why do my senses tell me that there's a water bottle here? Well, I'm assuming that because a water bottle exists right here, but guess what? Something else could explain it too, right? Couldn't something else, like aliens tricking me or me I'm dreaming right now? Couldn't there be other explanations? Therefore, I shouldn't believe in the evidence that I have because I could imagine a gap, right? I can imagine a gap in my knowledge. The gap would be there's some other explanation that I'm not thinking about, right? So there's a gap right there. And I'm just filling it in with my belief that there's an actual bottle. Well, what happens when you put together, as Tim pointed out, the cumulative case for the existence of God? It looks like God is what explains all of these things. You can always say maybe there's some other explanation that I haven't thought of, and so don't put God in that gap. So yeah, problems.
I got a couple questions here, unless you want to talk any more about that one.
No, you can jump in.
All right. So here's one from...
Wait. First, look at this. Look at this. Shameless Shamoon has entered the live stream. Why? He wasn't getting anyone watching his because no one watches his. And so he has to come over here and disrupt ours, hit and run, probably posted a comment and then ran in order to distract everyone from the information that's being presented. You see how he works? You see how he works? Gosh, why are there people like this? Anyway,
Hey, Sam.
Sam needs attention. Sam needs attention, so he comes over to our live stream to get attention because he can't get any attention on his own channel. All right, thank you. Go ahead.
All right, so who's this? Stub-a-Dub asks, "Hey Tim,
Stub-a-dub.
you said we can find evidence for free will. This is new to me. Can you explain in a nutshell? This is a common topic with atheists." Yeah, that's right. It is a common topic with atheists and also with Christians too. It was atheists who got me into this topic on free will, and I developed some arguments, namely to show that atheism was false. And then I started being attacked by Christians who said, no, we don't have free will. And so I started dealing with both atheists and Christians who deny free will. I like to have conversations with people on both sides of the theistic aisle. But I would recommend, to get started in this, I have a kind of an intro level article on my website. It's called Thinking About Free Thinking. And, that's why it says free think right here. So thinking about free thinking. But let me give you the nutshell argument. It's just two premises and a conclusion. It says, if humans are not free in the libertarian sense, they cannot either rationally infer or rationally affirm claims of knowledge. 2, humans can rationally infer and rationally affirm claims of knowledge. 3, conclusion, therefore humans are free in a libertarian sense. And I think one of the best ways to explain this quickly and in a nutshell, as you asked for, is to give this short thought experiment. It goes like this. Suppose a mad scientist somehow gets control of your brain, and he exhaustively controls and causally determines all of your thoughts and beliefs all the time. And this includes exactly what you think of and about, and exactly how you think of and about it. All of your thoughts about your beliefs and all of your beliefs about your thoughts are caused and determined by the mad scientist. And this also includes the next words that will come out of your mouth. So here's a question. How can you, not the mad scientist, rationally affirm the current beliefs in your head as good, bad, better, the best, true, or probably true, and the list can go on? Note the range of options from which to choose without begging the question. Good luck with that. That's impossible. And if you replace the scientist with physics and chemistry, or I would even argue with God, or anything else, anyone or anything else, then you've got the exact same rationality problem, but for different reasons. However, since humanity does possess the ability to rationally infer and affirm knowledge claims, and to argue otherwise would be to affirm it, we know that we possess the libertarian freedom to think, right? Free Thinking Ministries. We know that we have the libertarian freedom to think and take certain steps while deciding what we ought to affirm and believe. And since libertarian freedom seems to be metaphysically impossible if humanity is nothing but physical stuff, well, we can rationally infer then that humanity is more than just the physical. And I think the best explanation of that is a soul created in the image or likeness of God. And that's why I think the best explanation, this is not deductive, this is not a deductive conclusion here, but maybe an abductive conclusion, the best explanation for the existence of libertarian free will and the human soul, something immaterial about my existence, is the biblical view of God. So anyway, that's the argument in a nutshell. I've expanded it to show some of those other conclusions as well. But
notice Tim used that as an argument for free will. But if you notice, a lot of what he's saying should be a huge problem for atheists.
Right.
If they're atheists in the physicalist, materialist sense that the physical world is all that exists. If the physical world is all that exists and everything that happens is just strictly determined by laws of nature, particles in motion, and so on, then every thought that I've ever thought has been determined, right? It was determined before I was ever born, right?
Wasn't up to you.
particles in motion. And so going back briefly to his example, just think, if every thought that you think right now was determined by a mad scientist, every thought is, you're being given those thoughts, right? So suppose you're actually a brain in a vat, in a lab, and a scientist is making you think everything around you. Well, your thoughts would not, well, one, your thoughts would not be free. Two, you couldn't really say they were rational. They were rational thoughts, right? You would have no way, you wouldn't even know, right?
Because that would even be up to the mad scientist. Whatever
Yeah.
you said about your thoughts,
Yeah.
it's not up to you. Where did you go? That's what I want to know.
And so the mad scientist, he could give you a true belief, or he could give you a false belief.
You just wouldn't know it.
You wouldn't know, and so you can't even affirm your own thought processes and so on. But notice the exact same thing would follow if all of our thought processes were determined by particles in motion, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a belief. If I have a different belief, who's right? Well, you're determined to believe what you believe. I'm determined to believe what I believe. It's both the result of particles in motion. So how could we even trust any of our reasoning if we are just sort of particles in motion? So
And
we've got some issues there.
Right. And Sam Harris, I mentioned him earlier. Let me read a quote from his book. This is one of the things that got me started thinking about this stuff. He says, quote, "Free will is an illusion." Now, he says this because he's an atheistic naturalist. He thinks everything is caused and determined basically by physics and chemistry or the forces of nature. So he says, "Free will is an illusion. Our wills are simply not of our own making." And then he says, thoughts and intentions emerge from background causes of which we are unaware and over which we exert no conscious control. We do not have the freedom we think we have. And then he says, either our wills are determined by prior causes and we are not responsible for them, or they are the product of chance and we are not responsible for them. End quote. Now, the problem here is, and he's not even responsible for these own words. So how does he know they're any good? They were determined by, his own thoughts here that he records on paper weren't up to him. They emerged from background causes over which he was unaware and over which he exerts no conscious control. So he can assume, but guess what? That assumption is not even up to him either. Physics and chemistry, according to him, caused and determined his assumption. So you just get into this state of vertigo, and it should rock you. The state of vertigo is warranted, and it's a good reason to reject this view that if the thing that you call I can actually evaluate concepts like free will and like the resurrection, or if you can evaluate concepts, then there's something about you that's different than the rest of the stuff in the universe. Mm-hmm. You can evaluate things, even if you can evaluate it as good or bad, then you have a range of options. And I should define free will or libertarian free will very quickly. It at least means that there's no external causes when it comes to your thinking. If I'm talking about libertarian free thinking, that there's no mad scientist, there's no physics and chemistry causing and determining your thoughts leading to your beliefs. But I also like to argue that libertarian free will typically means that I possess the ability to choose between a range of alternative options, each of which is compatible with my image of God nature. And I throw an image of God, I can just say with my nature. So I have the ability to choose between a range of options, a range of alternative options, each of which is compatible with my nature. And so if I only have the ability to choose to say that one hypothesis is better than another, and I don't even have the ability to choose the other one, then I don't know for sure. I stand in no epistemic position to know if I really have inferred the best explanation or not. It's just an assumption, and like I said, that assumption wouldn't be up to me either. So anyway, that's the problem right there.
All right, Mike has a comment he'd like to address. There's a quick one here.
This is from Sam.
No, let me get this one because it's just a quick comment, but there's no response required. I just want to point out, Jamal Khan said, I'm from Pakistan, and I know so many ex-Muslims secretly living a Christian life due to death threats. So keep that in mind, everyone. There are lots of underground Christians and undercover Christians around the world. And what will be awesome is the one day when they're finally they're finally free to announce that they're Christians, and you're going to see a lot of people in Iran and Pakistan, all these other places say, "Yep, we're Christians, and there's a lot of us here." All right, good.
Yeah, this comes from, it's a question from C.M. Bradley saying, Dr. Licona, what are your thoughts on Lydia McGrew's new book regarding her reportage model of the literary standards of the Gospels? Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Lydia McGrew, she has her work in English literature, but has published also and spent some time studying philosophy and epistemology. And in recent years, she has turned her attention to the Gospels, mainly criticizing me and some others like Craig Keener, Craig Evans, and the New Testament scholars.
Hey, before everyone gets a negative view of Lydia, she is super insanely smart.
Yes, she
and
is.
I happen to like everyone who could be in this conversation. I love Mike. I love Lydia, but they have disagreements, and guess what? That's kind of okay because they're operating at a scholarly level, and they can have disagreements. But when you have disagreements like this, someone might be right, someone might be wrong. And what are your thoughts on?
Oh, she's wrong. No, she is smart.
Lydia McGrew is wrong.
She is wrong, and she is very smart. But there are no shortcuts, and there's a reason that those of us who have been spending years in this have come to the conclusions that we have. And when you haven't spent as much time in it, that you have a chance of making some errors. Now I have begun to read her book, and I'm about 120 some pages into it. And I find that she, when it comes to people like Craig Keener, Craig Evans, Richard Burge, and myself, she adopts the least charitable interpretation of what we mean. And I've noticed a lot of things. I'm not going to mention specific examples. That might come at another time. But there are lots of examples when she's just downright sloppy in the way that she interprets us, in the way that she interprets and pulls together some of the ancient authors and what they're saying. So, like I said, there's no shortcuts, and read her book with great caution. There's a reason why it's not published by an academic publisher, and she hasn't spent the years and put in the time for this, and it's really evident in the book to those of us who have.
Mike, you're just begging her to respond to this.
Oh, she'll respond, of course. I say one paragraph, she responds with 10 pages.
Well, what if you cram that many errors into what you said in one page, and then so it takes all those pages to unpack all your mistakes?
No, well,
I'm saying that
you just like blow his mind right there.
Look, the thing is, I just can't list them. I have to be able to explain them. But she's very select, and she'll quote some author on one thing, but ignores what he has to say another thing. It's cherry picking. But the problem is, I don't think she realizes she's cherry picking because she doesn't know the literature well enough.
All right. Well, we will expect Lydia's response to all of these slanderous and libelous accusations. I forgot the difference between slander and libel. Which one is it? One is written, one is spoken. Which one is it? You guys know slander is spoken, libel is written? Anyway. All right. Let's see what happens.
I got one.
Look at this. Wait, look at this. First of all, look at this. Sam Shimon again. Tatiana, you're here again. So he's going to someone in the chat on my live stream and says, "You're here again, but you won't show up when I'm on." Sam, people don't want to watch your live streams because you're horrible, right? Who wants to watch you, right? Your head looks like a giant melon. Your arguments are horrible. Who's gonna want to watch your live stream, Sam? Come on, quit trying to come over here and poach my viewers because no one wants to watch yours. All right, go ahead.
Shots fired.
All right, go back to Tim here.
All right, here's one from Fubaris Rex. It says, something that bothers me. Does free will necessarily lead to sin eventually? If free will explains evil in this life, how is free will compatible with a sin-free life and the resurrection? Thoughts? Yes, lots of thoughts on that. I do encourage you to spend some time on my website, freethinkingministries.com. I've written on this. There's several articles you can find here. So to answer your first question, does free will necessarily lead to sin eventually? No, it doesn't. But we know that it has. But it's not necessarily. It hasn't happened necessarily. So free will doesn't guarantee. I mean, I believe that the angels all have free will. A third of all the angels rejected God, but 2/3 of them didn't. So they had free will, and it didn't necessarily lead to sin. With humans, though, it has led to a separation from God. Next question is, if free will explains evil in this life, how is free will compatible with a sin-free life in the resurrection? Well, I believe a lot of this comes down to what Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4:17. He says, these light momentary afflictions prepare us for an eternal weight of glory beyond all comparison. Right? Paul's saying that these afflictions and the suffering that we experience in this life prepares us for eternity. So how does it prepare us? Well, I think you look at the beings who were created in a suffering-free state of affairs, Adam and Eve and Satan and a third of all the angels, right? They took their suffering-free state of affairs for granted, and they wrecked it, right? They wrecked it, but you and I are different. We've actually experienced the blessing, and this sounds weird, but the blessing of suffering. And look, I hate suffering, and I've experienced a lot of it this last year. I've experienced moral evil from people. I've experienced natural evil with my knee. I actually went blind in my eye for a while. People are asking what's up with the eye patch in the picture that Dave shared. Yeah, I went blind in my eye for a while in 2019. It was crazy. I thought I was going to lose it. Got it back. It's mostly recovered now. But
that was pretty funny that I picked the eye patch picture.
Well, it got a lot of attention. Yeah. I thought for sure I was going to have to become the eye patch apologist or something like that. But you and I have experienced tons of suffering in this planet, and I know that when I'm in the presence of God, like Adam and Eve and Satan and a third of all the angels were, that I'm not going to take a suffering-free state of affairs for granted. I've learned how stupid it is to sin. I've learned how stupid it is not to follow the commands of Christ. And I'm still in the process. I'm still learning more, but I've learned that much, and I know that when I'm with Christ, I'm not going to take that state of affairs for granted. So I've got a short video on my website called "Is There Free Will in Heaven?" And I believe that free will is vital for a true love relationship, and I believe that that true love relationship with God is the essence of salvation. There's nobody in hell that loves Jesus, and there's nobody in heaven that hates him. It's a true love relationship. And I've argued on my website that true love requires this libertarian free will, at least to resist or not to resist. I've argued a lot there. But if true love requires free will, and God's purpose for creating us is a true love relationship with him, and Jesus makes that clear in his two simple and easy to remember commands to humanity. He tells us, basically, it can be boiled down to this: everybody love God and everybody love everybody, right? It's all about love. It's the objective purpose of life. It's why you exist. And so if the purpose that God created us for is to have a true love relationship with him and all people for eternity, then we've got to have free will for eternity. So how does he guarantee that we don't wreck it like Adam and Eve, Satan, and a third of all the angels did? Because these light momentary afflictions, Paul says, prepares us for an eternal weight of glory. Hey, I'm just scratching the surface right now, so go to my website and find out more. But great question.
Two quick things for you, Tim. One, Fred Sanford says, wait, is that the Fred Sanford? Do you even know, are you too young to remember Sanford and Son?
Yeah.
You're too young? You remember Sanford and Son, right?
yeah.
Mike remembers Sanford and Son.
I think I'm older than you. I'm older than you. Yeah.
You big dummy! Awesome show.
I remember that.
Awesome show. Fred Sanford says, I love that shirt, Free Think or Die. Are those like available somewhere? Or or you have the only one?
No, you can go to freethinkingministries.com and it says FTM swag at the top, and click on that.
That's Free Thinking Ministries swag, the FTM swag on freethinkingministries.com.
That's right. That's right.
And just again, the link to both their channels are in the description box, so you could go to his channel there, and then he has also links to his other sites. But no, Fred Sanford, you can get your own free Think or Die shirt, and one for Lamont, and another one from Aunt Esther, and another one from Grady, and one more from Julio, and one more for Rollo. That's
Thanks,
right.
Fred.
Yeah. And another one. Oh, look at this. Would Tim be up to debate James White on Calvinism versus Molinism?
Yes. And
What? You debate James White?
if you're interested, Dr. White, we actually attend the same university, by the way, Northwest University. We're in the same school. I just submitted my PhD dissertation. And so we're kind of classmates in a sense, we've never actually sat in the same class together. But we're both at a Reformed university. I consider myself to be Reformed. So that might surprise you, and I can defend that position. But I am a Molinist, and I can deductively demonstrate, I believe, that everybody should be, or I can deductively demonstrate that some flavor of Molinism's got to be true. Yes, I would gladly have that conversation with James White. And Dr. White was recently on Eli Ayala's show called Revealed Apologetics. And I encourage you to watch that. Eli is a fantastic host. Eli used to be a Molinist and now is a Calvinist. In fact, he says that James White is his theological hero. But with that said, Eli understands Molinism. He used to be one, right? And he left. Now, I used to be a Calvinist. I used to be a diehard 5-point Calvinist. Not only that, I affirmed what I describe as exhaustive divine determinism, or EDD, exhaustive divine determinism. I didn't just affirm tulip. I believe that God causally determined everything. When I dropped my pencil or stubbed my toe, thanks a lot, God. I was an extreme Calvinist, not just a Calvinist, but a determinist. And now I reject that view for many reasons. But Eli and I, we started on different ends of the spectrum, and we passed each other in the night. But for a few moments, we were on the same page as we were passing each other. And I love talking to him, but he had Dr. White on his show maybe the week before Christmas. And I was just on his show responding to Dr. White. I gave a 2-hour response to James White's comments that he made on that show, because he really has a poor view, an incorrect view of Molinism. In fact, he attacks a straw man. So I encourage you to watch Eli Ayala's interview with Dr. White and then watch his interview with me. That's going to be the closest thing you're going to get to a debate between the two of us right now, but I would be highly interested in having that conversation in the future.
All right, I'm going to respond to 2 quick comments and then hand it over to Mike to respond to a couple of comments that are directed towards him. Let's see. Karis in the super chat earlier said, "How do I talk to an Ahmadi buddy after I read his leader's bogus books? I want to refute them, but I don't want to be rude because he bought me the books." Karis, I was actually in that exact same situation with Nabil. He gave me 2 books. I think one was from Mirza Ghulam Ahmed and one was from another of their leaders. But for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, Ahmadis are, they believe in all the 5 pillars of Islam. They believe in, the basics of Islam, but they have a different view of end times. They believe, so Muslims are required to believe in the second coming of Jesus. Ahmadis believe that it already happened in the person of Mirza Ghulam Ahmed. So they believe that Jesus already returned as this one guy. So they listen to that guy. And so the situation is, these books contain some of the stupidest arguments you've ever heard in your entire life. Massive sections of the book is just bragging about how brilliant the arguments are. And then the arguments are some of the silliest things you've ever read in your entire life. So one of the arguments was, if God were a trinity, then planets would be shaped like triangles and not like spheres. Because a sphere emphasizes oneness, whereas a triangle would emphasize 3 in oneness. And therefore, if God were a triune, he would make planets like triangles. And so those are the kinds of arguments. And then the rest of it is bragging about how brilliant the arguments are and so on. So the question is, how would you point these things out without upsetting the person? Unfortunately, Nabil was pretty open to me just being absolutely savage in my criticisms and so on. If you're worried about offending your buddy, a few weeks ago, I recommended a book called Tactics by Greg Kokel, and I'll be having Greg on a live stream here pretty soon to talk about this. But basically, I would say you can bring up sensitive information and very sensitive points in a non-confrontational, non-aggressive way. And this could be like the most sensitive info. So if you wanted to bring up Muhammad and Aisha, right? Just to give you an extreme example. If you wanted to bring up the fact that Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old girl with your Muslim friend, right? Now you could do this in a way that's going to make him not want to talk to you anymore, or you could do it in a gentler way by saying, "Hey, I was reading this article, and in the article, it quoted some Muslim sources saying that Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old girl. I have to admit that this bothers me. I was wondering if you could look through it and you could give me your perspective as a Muslim, because I just don't want to, believe the conclusions of the person who's writing the article. I'd like your input." There you're requesting information, right? So it helps to kind of how you frame the information. So if you find a really bad argument that you want the person to know about, you could come to them like that and say, "Hey, you bought me the books. I'm thankful to you for getting me these books. But I was reading right here in this chapter, and I was wondering what you think of this argument, because the argument sounds very strange to me. And I'm wondering if you really think that it's good. And maybe you could explain. I must be missing something here. I don't see how his conclusion follows. Could you explain that?" And so you bring up the exact same point that you would bring up if you just said, "Hey, this is stupid," but you do it in a gentler way, and that hopefully wouldn't run someone off. So just focus on using more questions. Again, if you can get a copy of Greg Kokel's book Tactics, I would recommend that. And also watch the upcoming live stream that I'll have with Greg, because the message is kind of geared towards that sort of thing, and not driving someone away or upsetting them and so on. One more quick, Hattie, I'm not going to answer the question here. I'm going to respond, but Hattie in the super chat says, "Hello, brothers in Christ. Can we please go through the vision of Daniel about the Son of Man and how Jesus referred to himself as the Son of Man?" So for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, in the book of Daniel, chapter 7, we read about someone like the Son of Man who came with the clouds of heaven, and he was going to receive the sort of service that is only due to God by all peoples in all nations and so on. And so he seems to be a divine figure, but he's approaching the Ancient of Days, who also is a divine figure. And Jesus at his Jewish trial, is actually, that's what they were pointing to, right? When he said he's the Son of Man coming with the clouds of heaven, that's what they said, you have to die. You have to die for this sort of blasphemy. And the reason this is important is Muslims point to Son of Man. They say, "Yep, he's saying he's the Son of Man," not realizing he's claimed to be a very specific Son of Man who was divine, and that this was considered blasphemous by the Jewish leaders. So the reason we're not going to go through the entire passage is I've been wanting to make a video on that for a while. So Hattie, if you do not see me here, at least by the end of February, make a video on that. Go ahead and remind me, and I'll get to it, because it's an important topic. All right, Mike, you got some questions you would like to respond to?
Yeah, there's a guy here, let's see, from Abu Bakr Ghazali. He says, "Can Mike Licona prove Muhammad is not a prophet?" Well, let me just give you something for your consideration. Jesus, it seems historically certain that Jesus predicted his death. All right, so we find this in Mark chapter 8, Mark chapter 9, Mark chapter 14. You find it several times throughout the Gospel of Mark. So that's probably our first gospel written. We also find it in what we would call the Q material in Matthew and Luke. That's material that's common to Matthew and Luke, but is absent from Mark. It could be that Luke got it from Matthew, or Matthew got it from Luke, or that they got it from a common source. That's what they call Q, if they think it was a common source. But either way, it's a tradition that comes independently of the Gospel of Mark. We also find it in the Gospel of John. In John chapter 2, he's predicting his death. So you've got it. It's in multiple independent accounts, Jesus predicting his death. And there's other reasons I could give for believing that it is historically likely, it's historically probable that Jesus predicted his imminent death. And when I say imminent death, because the Quran says that he will be killed when he returns in the second coming. So I say imminent death, that is in the 1st century. Jesus was predicting it. Now, we've got one of two options here. Jesus died, or he did not die as he predicted. If he died as he predicted, then the Quran is mistaken when it says in Surah, 4, that God only made it look as though Jesus died. He made it appear that he died, but he took him to heaven. So if Jesus did not die, then that would have made him a false prophet. But the Quran says he's a good prophet. He was a great prophet. Okay. So the Quran would be wrong about Jesus as a great prophet if Jesus didn't die. On the other hand, if Jesus did die as he predicted, the Quran is mistaken insofar as when it says that God only made it appear that he did. Either way, the Quran is mistaken. So I think the only way that you can really get out of that is to say, well, Jesus did not predict his death. But we've got lots of historical evidence that he did. I mean, you can go to my website. It's in my books, but you can go to my website, risenjesus.com. I've got an article on it there. So if you say that Jesus did not predict his imminent death, then you have to give some historical reasons why, not just quoting a book that claims to be divinely inspired that was written 600 years after Jesus' death. Give me some historical reasons. You have to account for all those things, all the reasons to think that he did predict his imminent death. So if he did predict his death, it would seem you're going to have to determine for yourself whether you think Muhammad was a true prophet of God when the Quran has such things in it.
Yeah, I'll just add to that so Mike pointed out that we have historical evidence that Jesus predicted his own death. We have the predictions recorded.
By the way, it's on my YouTube channel. On my YouTube channel, there's a video that says crucifixion or crucifixion, and that explains this.
I would add that if the Muslim wants to take the route that Mike said was, if he wanted a way out, he could argue that Jesus didn't say that, and therefore that the Gospels are wrong. The additional problem that he runs into is the Quran affirms not only the initial inspiration of the Christian sources, but also the preservation and the authority, right? So in Surah 7, verse 157, Allah says that during the time of Muhammad, Christians still had the gospel and were reading the gospel. If you look at how the gospel is used from the 2nd century onward, they refer to the fourfold gospel. The gospel would either refer, you could have the gospel as in terms of a message, right? Like preaching the gospel. If they're talking about a text you would read, they refer to from the 2nd century on, they treated the four gospels as a unit called the fourfold gospel. But basically it's affirming what the Christians were reading from the 1st century down to the 7th century. When we even look at Muslims, when they try to show that Muhammad is mentioned in the Gospels, because that's what the Quran says, where do they go? They go to our Gospels that we have now. So they're the Gospels that were preserved by Christians and were still being read by Christians that are affirmed by the Quran. So if you want to say that the Gospels we have are corrupted, when the Quran says that they were inspired by Allah, they say that the Quran says that no one can change the words of Allah, and that Christians were still reading the word of Allah as the Gospel, and that Christians had to judge by the gospel. If you want to say the gospel is something other than the gospel that we have, then Allah is telling us to judge by something that we don't have. And so the only way to make sense of the Quran saying that we still have the gospel and that we're supposed to judge by the gospel is that the Quran is affirming the gospel that we have. And so if you want to say that the prophecies, Jesus prophesying his own imminent death are wrong in the gospels, then your problem isn't just with history, your problem is with Islam as well, and with the Quran and with Muhammad. And so, guys, there's just no way out of this, right? History affirms that Jesus made these predictions about himself. The Quran affirms the sources that record these predictions. So if you want to deny that Jesus made these predictions, then you're kind of going against both history and your own book, and you're just gonna have some problems there. All right, what do you guys think? Shall we be wrapping up here? There's one more real quick. We'll go with this. What is your opinion of open theism?
It's false.
What?
It's false.
How can you know that? The only alternative would be closed. You're not closed-minded, are you?
I'm open-minded. In fact, I'm open to considering arguments for open theism. I think the arguments are lacking. I think the arguments for middle knowledge are quite strong, and I don't see good reason to think open theism is true. But, if I could add to that, I've talked about Molinism a little bit, and somebody has asked, what is Molinism? Just really quickly, and I mentioned James White on Eli's show on Revealed Apologetics, and Eli asked him to define Molinism, and he said it would take too long, and so he wasn't going to do it. But let me tell you, you can do it in just a few seconds.
Is there something about which you're passionate?
No, I don't really care about Molinism, but I just know a little bit about it. But mere Molinism is what I like to call, or it entails two essential ingredients or two pillars, if you will, and that's this: that one, logically prior to God's decision to create the world, God knew everything that would happen in any possible scenario He could create. And this entails God's middle knowledge. And two, as beings created in the image of God, humans, like God, possess libertarian freedom, which, like I said, a lot of times I defend these. There's several definitions of libertarian freedom. I affirm all of them that I'm aware of. But the one I specifically like to defend is the ability to choose between a range of options, each compatible with one's nature. And so that's mere Molinism right there. If you believe that logically prior to God's decision to create the world, that God knew everything that would happen in any possible scenario that He could create, then God's got middle knowledge. And if you believe that humans are created in the likeness and image of God and possess the ability to choose between a range of options, each of which is compatible with our image of God nature, then some flavor of Molinism's got to be true. So I argue deductively for both middle knowledge, that God possesses middle knowledge, and that humans possess at least a limited libertarian freedom. And that's all you need for Molinism to be true.
All right, shall we go ahead and wrap up now?
Sure.
Wait a second. I'm trying to see this comment. Let's go ahead and answer this real quick. Interesting question. Mike, isn't it the case that experience doesn't significantly weigh against Christ's resurrection? I'm not sure what he means by this. I'm not sure if he means, of course, Craig Keener's 2-volume work on miracles. He points out that, just backing up, the main response for the past couple centuries to the idea of a miracle or Jesus rising from the dead comes from David Hume, who argued that since there's a uniform human experience against miracles, we go through life all day and we don't see any miracles. Then when someone comes along and claims that someone has risen from the dead, well, all of our experience tells us that that's not the case. All of our experience tells us that that's not the case. That sort of thing doesn't happen. If 100% of people who die stay dead, then there's uniform human experience against Jesus' resurrection, and therefore, I'm sorry, I just can't believe what you're saying if you tell me that a man has risen from the dead. Now, there are all kinds of problems with that. One, you should never believe anything unique that happens in experience if it's the only example of its kind. So notice, following this, you should reject the atheist's claim that life formed on its own, right? Because wait a minute, it doesn't keep happening. Well, all of our experience tells us that doesn't happen. Why would you believe that, right? But one additional problem with it is, where are you getting the idea that there's universal human experience against miracles, that there's uniform human experience? Craig Keener has got a 2-volume set on miracles, and there was a study by Pew Research where they went to one denomination in 10 countries. There are just 10 countries out of the world, one Christian denomination, and they started accumulating data on how many people believed that they had personally witnessed a miracle, and they were already in the hundreds of millions, right? So there were hundreds of millions of people in one Christian denomination in just 10 countries. So if you do the math, it's probable that there are more than 1 billion people in the world who believe that they've witnessed a miracle. So if you're an atheist, every last one of those billion people have to be wrong about something they claim to have witnessed. So that would be my thoughts on experience not weighing against Christ's resurrection. Do you have a different direction you'd go, or what are you thinking?
Well, that'd be one of the directions I'd go, certainly. Just like you pointed out, there are plenty of people who have experienced miracles. I've experienced miracles. I know others who have experienced miracles. So
one second. How many of you, going along with that, how many of you in the chat believe that you have actually witnessed a miracle? Just let us know in the chat. But go ahead.
Yeah, so that would be one thing. It just goes against facts. There are a lot of people who have experienced miracles. Second, I think Hume's argument is misstated the way he states it. So it's like a balancing argument. He will say if you look at the evidence for Jesus' resurrection, okay, first of all, you've got natural law. And natural law would say that when a corpse dies, it's going to stay dead. It's not coming back to life. And we observe this with an exceptionless regularity. The evidence that we have that Jesus rose from the dead is human testimony. And human testimony can be quite reliable. It can also be quite unreliable. In any sense, it does not have the same exceptionless regularity of being correct as we find with natural law that shows that when a corpse dies, it's going to stay dead, it's not coming back to life. And so on balance, you've got to go with the weight of the evidence, and that pushes against what human testimony is saying, and it goes with natural law. So the way I would address that is to say, well, it is misconstrued, the argument itself, because we would all agree that when a corpse dies, it's going to stay dead. It's not coming back to life if it's left to itself. All right. But if God exists and wants to raise that body, well, then that all bets are off. God's the game changer. And so it's not the same argument anymore. So if someone said, let's say, what's the probability of someone walking on water? And you take, let's say there's 7 billion people in the world, and you take all but one, and they try to walk on water, whether it's a swimming pool, a lake, a river, an ocean, sea, whatever, and they can't do it. They all sink. And finally, the last person is a 4-year-old boy, and he says, well, I can't do it. And we take him to a swimming pool. I hold his hands, suspend his weight over the water, and I walk alongside the swimming pool, and he walks on water. Well, the fact that he walks on water was 7 billion people who couldn't walk on water unassisted says nothing pertaining to whether someone could walk on water assisted. It's just in a different reference class. And it's the same thing with Jesus. 7 billion people not coming back from the dead, their corpses stay, or 100 billion people estimated over the history of the human race, 100 billion people not coming back to life by natural causes says nothing pertaining to whether God could raise someone from the dead. So Hume's argument is misconstrued. I don't see any reason for taking that balancing argument. I think it fails.
All right. Now check these out. Guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you type 1 as an answer to a question, that means yes? Is that correct? Let's just get that.
I don't know.
Well, I saw a bunch
Sure.
of 1s. I see
Okay.
people doing that on certain channels. I just wanted to verify that 1 means yes. Is that
Because
correct?
typing 2 extra characters is too hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Tell us it. Yeah. Okay.
Or
So
nothing.
Mitch there says 1 equals yes.
All right.
All right. So let's go ahead. So we asked, by the way, how many of you, and there are a little under 700 people watching right now. So we asked, how many of you believe that you have personally witnessed a miracle? Let's go ahead and check these out here and then we'll close out. Kara says, I did. Mustard seed says 1, so that's a yes. Joe Schmo says me. The free lion your death said 10,000. I don't know if you mean 10,000 miracles,
Wow.
but that'd be a lot. Side note, SD11 and crew said, let me organize a debate between you and Dr. Zakir Naik. Deal. I agree. Here, see if he does. FB said, I did. Stud Muffin said 1. Just me said, I have. Robert says he had a vision of Robert said, I had a vision of 9/11 on the 10th. Renee said yes. Rose said yes. Robert said yes. Ursa said me. Cheryl said 1, so yes. Candace said, I've witnessed several miracles. Skeeter Lee says, I have. Ham Sunshine said yes. Psalm 116, I witnessed miracles. Susan says, experienced at least 2 miracles right off the top of my head. Kent, I have. Laura Lee put her hand up. Dave said, I've definitely myself witnessed a miracle. Now why? Chris said, not yet, but check out what's going on here. All the Wiser said, yep. Weaver said, 0 miracles here. Pete said, yes, multiple supernatural experiences. Shawnee, I have. Texas Toast, I have. James Payne says, yes. Julian, yes. Samuel, me several times. Glenn says, have witnessed miracle. Black Angel, yep. Sophia, yep. Super M, I have. Suze, yep. Healings plus personal salvation was just amazing. And what says, yep. Salacin said, yes, many times, a few myself experienced for myself. This is interesting. Andrew Martin says, I'm an atheist and I've had lots of miracles and I've even done them too. That's an interesting. Bakhtivar said, I have not. Marion said, I survived something that should have killed me. Is that a miracle? Well, I mean, it depends, right? You can be sick and, statistically you should die, but you don't. And that could just be your immune system. Or it can be a miracle. So there'd have to be more info. Lisa says, yes. The school said, maybe. Ink 70 says, me, many times. To the Muslims in the chat. Tesfaye says, yep. Darkwing Duck says, I have. I'm guessing 2 means no. So Pan Aggie says no. Joel said, I saw a friend healed of a generated disc in his lower back publicly. Greg J says, me. Salty is very salty because he says, I've never witnessed a miracle. Trust Jesus said, I was saved, but that's not what you mean. I know. Nuxa said, me. I have experienced 2 miracles. End Time Prophecy says, yep. Stubbadub said, I have had statistically improbable prayers answered if that counts as a miracle. Linda says, yep. Michelle says, I have experienced a miracle, Act 17 Apologetics. Jude says, I've experienced divine love of Christ. AZ Farmer says, yes, I've seen a miracle. My wife died for 20 minutes in a hospital and then woke up.
Wow.
Joseph said, just last year I experienced a miracle. RMS, I have. Choose Jesus, I have. Les Douglas says, yep. And so, and by the way, these a lot of these keep going on. I'm just scrolling down. I have. A man felt power moving along his legs, and his legs did not hurt anymore. So we have
almost an infinite.
Yeah, it keeps going. Notice this is 700 people watching, and how many people believe they've witnessed a miracle? It seems like well over 100, right? So
add me to the list.
Add you to the list.
Yeah.
And so, guys, that's one of the main problems. That's one of the main problems with Hume's claim that there's this uniform experience against miracles. There are people all over the place who believe they've witnessed miracles. So, yep. All right, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Now we are planning, since we're going to be down here for a couple days, we are planning to go live again tomorrow and on Wednesday as well. We have a couple topics that we're interested in covering. But if there's anything else you'd like us to cover, go ahead and put those in the chat and in the comments after we're done, and we'll see if we can work those in. Final thoughts, Tim, for anyone out there.
Dave, I want to thank you for introducing Mike and I to your YouTube friends. It's an honor, and appreciate your friendship, brother.
Mm-hmm. Mike,
Yeah,
any final thoughts for everyone?
Yeah, thanks for joining us tonight, and thanks for having us on, Dave. And Dave and I go way back.
Back.
But hey, thanks for allowing us to come into your living room, dining room, wherever tonight. Nice to spend some time with you. God bless you.
All right, Swordfish, as we're wrapping out, I'm not sure what apologetics is. Apologetics is basically giving a rational defense for what you believe. It comes derived from a Greek word that was a term in court where your defense of your client was called, your speech that you would give was called your apologia. So it's your defense of the claims. And so the apostle Peter adapts it in 1 Peter 3:15 And he uses it to say that the Christians always need to be ready to give a defense for the hope that we have. So that's what we do. But guess what? All Christians are called to do that. And so, guys, not all of you need to be full-time apologists, but all Christians should be apologists. You should be able to give people reasons for what you believe. If you believe in God, you believe that Jesus died on the cross for sins and rose from the dead. Biblically, you're supposed to be able to give a defense for that. So that's what we're here for. That's what we're here for. That's what lots of other people are out there for. Because if you can't, then it's good to learn. All right. Lord willing, see you all tomorrow. God bless everyone.